pedagogy is a core factor in the well-being and the outcome of learners. And over time, different pedagogies have evolved as society changes and new trends appear. There are, however, 3 approaches that we're going to focus as this program evolves. The first one is didactic pedagogy, and sometimes it's called a traditional approach, which is teacher-led, is rule-bound. It's about learning received knowledge and being able to repeat it appropriately. It's the kind of pedagogy that's associated with industrialisation. Secondly, there's an approach that we call authentic pedagogy, also described sometimes as modern progressivism, which becomes more child-centred in its attempt to motivate children to learn the things that society needs them to understand well, both as knowledge, skills, and also sensibilities. But thirdly, and more importantly for us, we're going to examine what new learning means. For us, this approach involves reflexive learners and a pedagogy that is transformative. It's a pedagogy that's relevant to our times because we live in a time of a networked knowledge society where what comes out of a group is just as important as what comes out of an individual. And again, given the diversity of learners and the complex contexts in which learning happens, there is no simple or single pedagogical approach. Educators need to make purposeful and appropriate choices to suit individual learners, to suit groups of learners, and to suit the kinds of goals that they negotiated together. But these 3 approaches are what we will examine in great depth and understand the consequences of the choices we make when we deploy any one of them, either individually or as part of a repertoire.
What we're going to go on and do through the rest of this video series is we're going to look at the practices of education, and we're going to look at early modern education. And when I say early modern education, I don't mean early modern times. I actually mean the beginnings of classical modern education in the mid-19th century, and we're going to look at the rise of something that we call didactic pedagogy. So when I spoke about textbooks and when I spoke about lectures, that's classical didactic pedagogy. And then what happens is around the turn of the 20th century, we have a flowering of thought around something that we are going to classify as, and we are going to characterise as authentic pedagogy. It's sometimes called progressive pedagogy. Perhaps the most famous proponents were Maria Montessori and John Dewey. We'll talk about those. In fact, the basic idea of authentic pedagogy has been around for as long as schooling has. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, even at the end of the 18th century, took fright and was horrified by didactic pedagogies and suggested something which is like authentic pedagogy then. So these are old ideas, and they've been a typical reaction to didactic pedagogy all along the way. But also one of the reasons why we want to kind of do this historical journey through modern education from its earlier moments to these contemporary moments is there are big changes going on now. I've just alluded to some of those. And we call these new learning. What does new mean? Well, it doesn't mean much particularly because everything's new at some time. Didactic pedagogy was new in its time. But what we mean by new learning now is what we're going to characterise as reflexive pedagogy. We'll explain that more as we go along. And stuff which is truly transformative of learners, where they can change who they are in the world, which they perhaps couldn't do quite so effectively with didactic and authentic pedagogy. Now, in a way, new learning is a set of ideals. It's an agenda. It's a set of principles. It's a set of things we would like to achieve. The world is a difficult place. It's an unequal place. It's hard for us to beat all those structural constraints. But nevertheless, it's an agenda which I think is viable now, and it's one which is certainly ethically justifiable. Now, what's interesting is that, if you like, this shift from didactic to authentic to new learning might be taken as a shift over time. But what's really interesting is that, in fact, today we find each of these forms of education, institutional, pedagogical, and so on. We find all of them at work, and sometimes all of them at work in the same course, in the same institution. And we actually find practices which in some ways are layered, and there are some aspects of authentic and didactic pedagogy that we might find useful and we might want to preserve. So we don't really have a completely partisan view of let's throw away didactic and throw away authentic. We want to analyse them because there are some insights in each of those pedagogies which we may want to retain in this new learning environment as well. We're going to go on in the next videos and we're going to look at how we think about our practice. We're going to try to theorise our practice, and we're going to ask the question of how we evaluate the effects of our practice as educators. So this is what we mean by exploring both the science and the practices of education. The science is the theory, which we're conceptualising as a kind of the academic discipline of education, which means if you like, the carefully designed systematic thinking that we need to do as educators if we're going to become teachers and professionals in this field. And we're going to do that by examining in detail this range of practices that I've just been discussing.